Hey everybody, Den Haring here. My channel is Fish Den 365. We're all about the art and science of fishing, especially bass fishing, but we fish for a lot of other species as well. I have a question for you today. And that question is, are expensive baits worth the money?
That's what I'm talking about.
So this could be a giant debate depending on who you talk to. And I'm wondering where you stand in this debate. So this whole debate leads me to Den's rule number one, which is anytime you have opposing viewpoints or polar opposite positions or opinions on something, someone's way over here, another person's way over here, the truth is somewhere in between. And I suspect this is also true when it comes to expensive baits and whether or not they're worth the money or not. But let's talk about the baits themselves and give a little history about how the baits have become more and more expensive over time. Today we're blessed because there's just so many lures and baits available out there for us to fish. And the technology that's creating them is getting better and better all the time, and so the lures are getting more and more realistic all the time. They're much more consistent in how they act and how they behave in the water. They have specific actions that are very, like we said, consistent, and it's just amazing that how the technology has advanced over the last, I'll say, 20 to 30 years. But it doesn't mean that the lures that were made 20 or 30 years ago are no longer effective. In fact, in a lot of ways, they might be more effective now in that bass get conditioned to lures over time. And some lures are more conditionable than others. In other words, a Senko or a soft plastic bait, it's really hard for a fish to get conditioned to those kind of lures because they're just so natural in the water. But even there, it happens to some degree. But when you have a hard body lure, something like this Smithwick Rogue or a spinner bait, for example, fish do get conditioned to those lures, and by that they start to avoid them. And so over time, anglers demand more and more available lures with different actions, different looks, better paint jobs perhaps, and we always are trying, as anglers, we're always trying to stay one step ahead of the fish. And so this is how we've come to the modern era of tackle and baits, where we have lures that are not so cheap anymore. And even cheap and even expensive is a relative term. For example, I have here a Megabass Edo Vision 110 +1. It's got a little bit of a bigger lip on there. It goes down a little deeper. Well, that goes somewhere for $20 to $25, I believe, today, somewhere in that price range. But there's lures that make this seem cheap in comparison. For example, this is a different type of lure here. It's a glide bait. It's made by River to Sea, and it's called an S-Waver, and it's again in that $20 to $25 range. But there are other glide baits and swim baits out there that'll cost you $120, like the Gancraft. That's a really well-known swim bait, catches a lot of good fish, $120. There's another one called the Roman Maid Mother, $400, $600, $700 for one bait. Now we're talking expensive, right? So again, even when we talk about the expensiveness of baits, we're talking in relative terms. So are these baits worth it? I think it depends on a number of things, and it depends on what you can afford as an angler, and how willing you are to experiment with some of these expensive baits. For example, I have a couple of these Vision 110 Edos. They're very, very good jerk baits. Maybe the best there is. They're that good. And this bait will cost you $20 to $25, like we already mentioned. This one's a silent version here, so if I cover up the hooks and shake it, no rattles in it. And so I like silent baits, but these baits, they do catch fish. And not too long ago, the Lucky Craft Pointer 100 came out. This is a Pointer 100 in ghost minnow color. And when this bait came out, it was thought to be expensive because it was $14, $15. Today they still run $15 to $16 for these lures. But these lures catch fish too. And if you look at this one hard, you'll see that this one's got some bite marks on it because it's caught its share of fish. So I guess you can see that I have my share of pointers. I don't have a whole lot of the Vision 110s, the Itos. I have several, I'll say. I have friends that I know that have 100 or more of these. And so when you're considering $20 a pop at $100 or more, at 100 lures or more, you know, you're getting well over $2,000 worth of just one type of lure. So I don't take it to that degree because I don't feel I need to. I feel as long as I have several of these, I'm ready to go in the right colors, I'm good to go. I do have more pointers. That's probably because they're cheaper. I probably have somewhere in the range of 20, 25 of these pointers, maybe a little more. They catch fish. They're very good baits. You go down the scale a little bit. This is a Smithwick Suspending Pro Rogue. This lure has been out for a long time. I don't even remember exactly when it came out. It could have been the late 80s or in the 80s sometime, not sure. But this is a very good suspending jerkbait, especially if you're willing to put a little extra weight on it. Sometimes they tend to rise up a little bit, but you can put some weight on the bait, or you can weight the hooks and make it truly suspend. These things catch a lot of fish. They always did, and they still do today. And it wouldn't surprise me if it's just as good today as it used to be, because fish aren't used to seeing it anymore because of all these other jerkbaits. That's what you got to keep in mind when you're fishing. How conditioned the fish are, how pressured the fish are that you fish for, and what are they conditioned to? And do you have something that's just a little different that you can show them? Staying with the jerkbait category, you know, this jerkbait here, to some people, is the greatest jerkbait ever made. This is a Rapala X-Rap. And if you're talking smallmouth fishing, there are very few baits that are better than the X-Rap when it comes to smallmouth fishing. Now, there's a time and a place for this, because this X-Rap is a very hard-working jerkbait. In other words, it really slashes back and forth, and so it's got a wild action. And Rapala has come out over the years of variations of this that are much more subtler. Some have a roll to them, some don't slash as much. And that's because they know that at different parts of the season, the bass are less active and not as willing to chase. But as far as just a standard jerkbait goes, once that water starts getting into the 50 and above 50 degree range, this thing is a killer. And this Rogue will cost somewhere between $6 and $7, and I imagine this one might be just a little higher than that. So you can, obviously the price is coming down, and yet these lures are, you know, they can be every bit as effective as the other two that we were just talking about. You know, I mentioned this S-Waver a little while ago. $20, $25 range. This bait is a very good bait. When it comes to this, I don't think it's worth paying $400 for another one, because I think this one catches them good enough. I won't say better because I don't know. I don't have direct experience with it. But I have a lot of friends that fish these baits, and there's a lot of people on YouTube that fish these, and these are really well built baits. They're very well known, and they catch fish. So if you want to get into the glide bait category without breaking the bank, then the S-Waver, this is an S-Waver 168, may be the place to start. And 168 means it's 168 millimeters long. There's also a 200, which is 200 millimeters long, a larger version. Let's talk about crankbaits a little bit. This is a Norman DD22. It's a deep diving, 22 means 22 feet. You'd have to get a really, really long cast on really, really light line to get it down to 22 feet, but you certainly can get it down to 16 feet. And if you're using light enough line with a long enough cast, you can get it down to about 18. Especially some of these. They're not all the same, because there's just some variation in these crankbaits. But this is a cheap crankbait. You know, it'll only run you maybe $4, $5, $6 at the most. And in my opinion, in the summertime, when you're going for bass that are active in warm, hot water, there's no better crankbait than the DD22 if you're fishing a deep diving crankbait, if you need to get down to that depth. These things just kill fish. They catch them very well. So again, you know, you don't have to feel like you have to buy all the most expensive crankbaits, because there's very inexpensive crankbaits out there too. All of these categories today, there's you know, you got your cheaper baits, you got the middle of the road, and then you have the very, very expensive ones. But I find that a lot of the baits that still have a reasonable price tag are still extremely effective at catching fish. So where do I stand on this debate? Well, I'm somewhere in the middle. I see a place for spending money on lures, especially in pressured waters. because I think those lures can give you an advantage for catching fish. So I'll spend some money on some expensive lures, and as a result, you know, I'm a little poorer. But it does, you know, again, this is a choice that each one of us as a fisherman has to make based on what he's willing to spend, what he's willing to do to catch fish, and what his budget will allow. And so you have to consider all those things when you're making these decisions. The good news is you don't have to have these expensive baits to enjoy fishing, to catch fish, and to be very effective at fishing. On the other hand, if you do want to spend that kind of money, it's a lot of fun trying these new baits, these super high technological baits that have great actions and great colors. That's fine too. I think both things are good. I think it's good for the industry that both types of baits are available. And one last thing that I'll leave you with when it comes to expensive baits, if you're trying to decide if it really makes a difference or not. One way you can maybe find that out is if you follow the professional bass trails, you know, BASS, FLW, Major League Fishing. You'll notice that these guys are sponsored by different sponsorships. Different bait companies are part of those sponsors. Let's just give you an example. Strike King, they sponsor a lot of the top pros today, and they make very good baits. So this is not a knock against Strike King in any way. I love their square bill crankbaits. They make a lot of good baits. But you'll find that if you watch these pros who are sponsored by Strike King, every now and then you'll see them throwing something that's not a Strike King product, and they're not sponsored by them either. For example, you might find that somebody who's sponsored by Strike King and is usually throwing a Strike King jerkbait, if you look hard enough, you'll find they're actually throwing one of these sometimes. That's a way that tells me, and it should tell you too, that there's something special about this more expensive bait. If a professional is willing to actually use it instead of the one that he's sponsored by, that's telling you this bait, this more expensive bait, is giving him some advantage, or at least he thinks it is. And he would have enough experience, he or she, if they're a professional bass angler, would have enough experience to be able to make that determination. So that's one of the ways that you can kind of look at that as a way of thinking about it also. Well, whether you spend $6 on baits or $66 on baits, I sure hope they work for you, and I sure hope they catch you more fish this year. I'm looking forward to the weather getting a little warmer, getting out there and showing you how to use a lot of these different baits. I can't wait. So that'll be some of the next phases coming soon. I have an unboxing video coming next. That'll be coming out within a few days. Don't forget to hit that like button if you liked the video. Subscribe to the channel. Any questions that you might have or any comments about the bait debate, please comment in the comments underneath the video. I'd love to start a conversation on that. Remember, we're certified Bassified, and may God bless your fishing endeavors.